I'll keep it real simple. Does Georgia need more out of Carson Beck this season? I think the answer is probably yes. Now, I don't want to be someone who overreacts to the beginning of the college football season. I don't. And obviously, the nature of this job is me coming on here and giving you takes over and over again, right? There's a lot of consistency to it. There's only so much you can talk about. But I think that if Georgia's run game stays the way it's been and doesn't get better, right? It's not bad, but it hasn't been great and it hasn't been as good as it's been in the past when Georgia has competed for national championships, right? So it just hasn't been good. And, running for fewer than 100 yards against Alabama, it's not going to work. It never does work especially against a team like Alabama. Do they need more out of Carson Beck? All right, so that's the question. I want to examine what Carson Beck has actually done this season. We'll talk a little bit about what he had to do for Georgia last season. But so far, Georgia's running game has been a little bit vanilla. It hasn't exploded yet. It had explosive moments against Clemson. Obviously, you had a big Trevor Etienne run against Tennessee Tech. But it was that's a game where Carson Beck threw a lot and was pretty effective. But that game, you just kind of throw it out the door. You get to Kentucky. Georgia had a hard time running the ball in Kentucky, and it hurt Carson Beck a little bit, hurt the passing game. He was off rhythm. Against Alabama, they can't run the ball super effectively, and they start getting down, and they start airing it out. And Carson Beck actually helps Georgia get back into that football game. He was highly criticized for that, but you also have to give him praise for how he responded to the first half woes, right? And some of the second half woes. It wasn't just in the first half. You get Auburn last week. Georgia, it's a solid running day, but it's nothing to hang your hat on. And it feels like Trevor Etienne is close to really blowing up, to really becoming a back that can not carry the load, but be a significant part of Georgia's offense. I don't think he's a significant part yet, if you ask me, but I think that's on the table for them. Ryan Crow from Dawg Post here. Talking about Carson Beck, I'm going to start breaking down a little bit of what he's done this year, right? Been 5 games. We're about to reach the halfway mark. They're about to hit 6 games this weekend. Once they play Mississippi State, they'll be halfway into the regular season. So let's look at it. The newsletter's down below. I'm blasting out the newsletter. This is going out at 1 p.m. on Friday. I'll be blasting out the newsletter right after this, and you will get 5 for Friday, premium content, free stories, final feelings, picks. There's a lot of stuff on Dawg Post that we do that you can't get anywhere else, and the best way to stay in touch, to keep in tune with what's going on, is to be signed up for our newsletter. All right, so I've got what I'm looking at right now is Carson Beck's game log. Looking at his numbers. And obviously, we know the context of what's happened in these games. Clemson, strong start, right? Slow start in the actual game in the first half. Slow starts it's just a new reality for Georgia. They have a hard time at the beginning of these football games, and I'm going to say that until I see otherwise, but I haven't seen otherwise. But in Clemson, in the second half, they get it all figured out, and he finishes 23 for 33, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 69.7% completion percentage. It's a really good game, especially against the Clemson defense. I think it's pretty good. I don't know that there is an elite defense in college football, and if there is, I don't know if Georgia is going to play it. Clemson certainly isn't an elite defense, but it's pretty good, and it has a lot of good football players. Tennessee Tech, he had a great game, right? 242 yards, 5 touchdowns, 72% completion percentage. I do wonder, there was a moment in the Tennessee Tech game where they started to struggle, and you just don't think that they should in a game like that. And I wonder if that means anything. 15 for 24 for 160 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. One of his worst games as a Georgia Bulldog, right, was that game against Kentucky where he just couldn't get it figured out. And that stretched into the Alabama game. But against Kentucky, Carson missed some guys. He missed some throws. It seems it's too often something that I'm noticing with Georgia this season. And I'm noticing it the most when Carson throws to Arian Smith, number 11, if you're not familiar. Just off target, off rhythm. It doesn't seem like the offense is completely in sync. Now, in a game against Kentucky, this is a Kentucky team that got ran through by South Carolina. Georgia struggled to run on that team, and it struggled to pass the ball. maybe we'll look at this in a few weeks and say, that Kentucky game was kind of fluky. I don't really know why Georgia struggled like that. But then a lot of the same struggles happened in the Alabama game. Carson, 27 for 50, right? You know about the 3 picks. Obviously, he threw for 439 yards and threw 3 touchdowns. But between 5 turnovers, if you're counting that safety as well, that's not going to work in a game like that, right? Well, how does Carson Beck respond to a game like that? You move on against Auburn, the homecoming game, 23 for 29. It was his best game of the season by far. 79.3% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. He didn't really miss guys. I don't think that Carson Beck is going to finish with the Heisman-type numbers that he was potentially projected to get, right? Where it's like 4,000 plus yards, 40 touchdowns, all that. Those things are somewhat realistic. I mean, through 5 games, he's 12 touchdowns, 3 picks, so I don't know. Maybe he gets 3 more this week. He's on pace for around 30 touchdowns. On pace for around 30 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. That's about it. That would be an improvement. In terms of yards, he's not on pace, right? He's not throwing for as many yards as he did last year. I think you can feel it a little bit when you compare it to last season. And obviously, Georgia's team was different last season, but 300 yards in the first game, almost 300. Had to save them a little bit at South Carolina, almost 300. He throws for over 300 against UAB, throws for over 300 against Auburn, throws for almost 400 against Kentucky, throws for 260 against Vanderbilt, not that great of a game, throws for over 300 against Florida, threw for over 300 against Ole Miss, threw for almost 300 against Tennessee. They were slaying it last year. And it's a little bit easier when you have Brock Bowers, right? When you have Ladd McConkey. The offense was more stacked a season ago. And is it really, maybe this isn't about Carson Beck as much, but the thing is, the expectations that were put on Carson Beck this offseason were high, right? When you talk about Georgia having a superstar on offense, you talked about Brock Bowers in the past. You talked about Todd Gurley, Nick Chubb. It was never about the quarterback. Even as good as Stetson Bennett was in that second season, it was, he got the recognition at the Heisman ceremony, right? He makes it to New York's Heisman finals. But this year, it was Carson Beck that was anointed as Georgia's star. It was anointed as a guy that is going to carry the Georgia Bulldogs, right? Partially because the weapons just aren't as good, right? But Dominic Lovett and Dylan Bell and Trevor Etienne, these are good football players. It is a step down from some of what they've had in the past. And obviously when you have Brock Bowers, that's not a normal football player to have on your roster, right? But last year we saw Georgia's run game struggled a little bit. Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton were not healthy at the beginning of the season. It took a long time for Kendall Milton to really get going. Dejan Edwards was pretty good once he first got in there, but it took him a couple games. And, he wasn't quite as consistent as you'd want to be. I guess he was the RB1. They were more of a tandem. The truth is, this Georgia team just hasn't ran the ball super effectively. Nate Frazier has, a guy that I think has a lot of electricity, hasn't played a lot for them. Branson Robinson hasn't looked like his normal self, and that's what happens when you come back from a major injury. Roger Robinson hasn't played. And Georgia's passing game has, I think, been hurt as a result because the run game hasn't been as good because they don't have consistent guys again. So maybe Carson, you didn't. This is me not calling out Carson, by the way. I hope that's not what this is being taken as. But what does Georgia actually need to start exploding? Maybe it would be through the passing game. Maybe they do need more. And that's going to come between Carson Beck and those weapons. So if Georgia's run game, like we've talked about a lot this week, doesn't improve, you need to see more out of Carson Beck. You need to see more out of Dylan Bell and Arian Smith and all those guys. Otherwise, this team's just not going to compete for a championship. Point blank. Thanks for watching.